A mastermind breaks into the most heavily fortified vault in France, tunneling under the busy city streets. He advances at a rate of 6 inches a day and scores 12 million in cash and jewels, which took him 2 years to break into banks' vaults, and nobody's done it since. Let's find out who did it and why did he do it. The city of Nice, heart of the French Riviera, the city of luxury and wealth. The French Riviera was sparkling in the summer sun, where the deep blue sky met the calm Mediterranean Sea. The waves were gently lapping the sandy beaches, creating a magical scene that attracted tourists from all over the world. In the 1970s, the wealthy there relied on one bank, the Société Générale, to keep their valuables secure. Its enormous vault was like an underground city. With over 4,000 safety deposit boxes, it contained more cash, gold, and jewels than the top 5 banks in Paris combined. The vault's door is 20 inches, and the walls 4 feet thick. And when you build something that massive, you stand back and look at it and say, hey, nobody's going to get in this. But on July 15th, 1976, the day after France's Bastille celebration, bank workers arrived to discover that the vault's door isn't opening. At first, it was thought to be a simple mechanical malfunction, because it was a 75-year-old steel structure. But after hours of trying to open the door, the experts discovered something far more perplexing. The door was welded from the inside. The police were called immediately, and soon, the entire city of Nice was on high alert. As investigators made their way inside the vault, they discovered that not only had all the money been stolen, but all the safe deposit boxes had also been looted. A message was written on the wall: without weapons, without violence, without hate. Over 12 million in cash, jewelry, and gold was stolen from the bank. French authorities began to bring in detectives from all over France, and the amount of work the detectives now were faced with was staggering. The fingerprints were superimposed on top of each other and were useless to the police. Police quickly discovered a hole in the massive vault wall, leading 60 feet into the city sewers. Upon entering the sewers, they found stacks of acetylene tanks, miles of electric cable, sophisticated ventilation and tunneling equipment, and plasma-cutting torches, but little that was of use in identifying the culprits. With almost nothing to work with, the authorities examined their files for any suspicious activity just prior to the crime. They find a report about a group of men who were stopped by police outside an abandoned villa near Nice, but because of no evidence connected to the robbery, they let them go. After noting their ID and license plate numbers, after the police returned to the villa, the men were gone, but they find evidence connecting them to the crime. They saw some bottle of wine that was the same that the police found in the vault, and also they saw a lot of boots full of mud, and it was the same color from the sewers. However, they were able to arrest a couple of them who recklessly tried to cash in some gold ingots, and they'd simply forgotten that gold ingots are identifiable because they're numbered, and that's how they caught some of robbers. In an attempt to reduce their sentences, they provide police with a list of people they claim were involved in the burglary. One of the robbers, possibly feeling shortchanged or under pressure, provided information to the authorities. Included in this list are the men confronted at the abandoned villa, and one of them was Albert Spaggiari. The mastermind of France was Albert Spaggiari, who planned all of this, a local wedding photographer who had dedicated over 2 years to perfect this extraordinary heist. The question is, how did he do it? Spaggiari was a soldier. During the war in Vietnam, he was in the airborne. He was a man full of contradictions. He had a sharp gaze and an enigmatic smile, and he always held a cigarette between his lips. A was a charismatic figure who easily drew people to him. Upon returning to France, the former paratrooper finds civilian life unrewarding. He saw banks as a symbol of injustice and exploitation, and he believed that it was time to change the situation. Spaggiari was convinced that the banks were exploiting ordinary people and that someone had to stand up to them. He had a plan so bold and daring that it would become legendary. Craving excitement and armed with his military training, he conceives an extraordinary plan to rob the Société Générale. He would spend hours studying plans and maps, looking for a weak point that he could exploit. He knew his plan was risky, but it was worth a try. He happened to be looking at a set of plans for the city, and he noticed it's the proximity of a sewer system to the bank. The sewers are like a real city. There were 2 main huge sewers, so we had to explore both. They needed to spend months just wandering around the sewer system, just exploring where they came in, where they came out. It was extremely complex, required a tremendous amount of legwork. Convinced the sewers can be used as a route into the bank, Spaggiari now sets his plan in motion. Under a false name, he rents a safety deposit box and cases out the vault. He was struck with the enormity of the place. During one of his visits to the vault, Spaggiari determines the best location to tunnel through the vault's exterior wall, the tools he will need to break into the deposit boxes, and what security systems the bank has in place. In his deposit box, he placed a very loud alarm clock. He set it to go off and waited to see if it triggered the bank's security system. When the police didn't respond, he knew there was no alarm. They didn't have a sophisticated alarm system in the vault, because they felt they really didn't need it. Spaggiari now assembles his elite team, made up of former paratroopers, members of the Marseille mob, and tunneling experts known as the sewer rats. Equipped with detailed survey maps, he calculates exactly where his crew must break through the sewer wall. The next step is to secure electricity for the ventilation fans, lights, and tools. His team taps into a light fixture in a parking lot, then runs the cable into the sewers, and feeds it over a quarter-mile to the site of their tunnel. They had to set up all of their equipment, and what they did was actually chip away at the concrete. Having broken through the sewer wall, they must now dig 60 feet through hard-packed earth and rock, working exclusively at night. They progress at a rate of only 6 inches a day. They had to tunnel in there and then extract the dirt. They had to dispose of the dirt. To avoid detection, they disperse the rock and earth throughout the adjoining tunnels. Because the work is physically exhausting, Spaghetti creates teams that dig on alternate nights. He also insists that the men refrain from drinking alcohol and coffee and get at least 10 hours of sleep before each shift. They had to shore up the walls and the ceiling as they went along so it wouldn't collapse on them. And then, at the end of the day, what they had to do was to go in and seal off the tunnel that they have been working in, so that during the day when the city workers were down there, they would not notice that there was actually a tunnel being added to the tunnels that were already down there. Doing all this works needed an enormous amount of material to pull off a job of this size, most of which he stole from construction sites in the surrounding region. Night after night, Spaggiari and his crew carry supplies into the tunnel without arousing suspicion, and they kept doing this for 2 months before they finally hit the vault's wall. Because Spaggiari is ahead of schedule, he has his men stop work and wait until the bank closes for the July 14th holiday weekend. 2 days later, they begin their final assault. As you can probably guess, breaking through the concrete vault wall will be noisy, but Spaggiari already planned for that too. He had post lookouts above ground to signal if they're in danger of being discovered. Using hammers, chisels, they drilled into it, and all these different things, just one after another, literally bored their way through, which took them almost their full day's worth of work just to get through the vault's wall. The only problem is, Spaggiari discovers he's made a small miscalculation. They ran into the back of some sections of safety-positive axes, which means that they got through the concrete, but now they have 24 inches of steel to get through. Now if you start cutting it up with torches and everything, you make a lot of heat and smoke. They had to sit down and kind of figure out how they're going to go inside. So they came up with this ingenious idea of getting a jack and literally jacking through boxes away from the wall. With no time to transport a heavy jack through miles of sewers, Spaggiari improvises. He gets his team to disguise themselves as city workers and deliver the jack down to him through the closest manhole. Now they're able to lever the wall of deposit boxes away from the tunnel hole. Spaggiari and his team are finally in the vault, and the first thing they do is welding the doors closed so they won't be disturbed. Spaggiari does what any Frenchman would do. He calls for a celebration. With the bank reopening in less than 48 hours, Spaghetti now sets his men to work, opening the thousands of deposit boxes. Anticipating the vast amount of jewelry contained in the vault, Spaghieri has brought along an appraiser who selects the most valuable items, and they put all the money, the gold, the jewelry into the bags. During this time, they had a picnic inside the vault, eating wine and pâté. This casual and almost nonchalant behavior in the midst of their crime was noted by police when they later discovered food scraps, wine bottles, and cigarette packs inside the vault. However, Spaghieri's luck is short-lived. During their robbery, a big storm came over Nice, and when they heard the storm, they were afraid the water was going to rise and they could not escape. Spaghieri decides to abandon the vault, but before leaving, as a defiant act, he left a note on the vault wall that read, "Without weapons, nor hatred, nor violence." But even with his name, police still have no direct evidence linking Spaghieri to the crime, so they were all left empty-handed. But all that changed in October. French police received a telegram from Interpol in Washington, telling them that during a trip to the United States, a certain Mr. Spaghieri introduced himself to CIA. Spaghieri offers to aid American Cold War efforts by breaking into Soviet embassies, citing his extraordinary burglary of the Nice's bank as proof of his talents. The CIA declines to employ him, and instead tips off the French authorities. When he returns to France, Spaghieri is arrested and charged with the burglary of Nice. Spaghieri was imprisoned at the Nice jailhouse. At the request of the presiding judge, he was brought to the courthouse to be interviewed. Spaghieri revels in the publicity surrounding him. To everyone's surprise, he not only confesses to the crime, he even brags about his brilliance. Spaghieri talked a lot about his role, but didn't breathe a word about who his accomplices were. For the next 5 months, the judge interrogates Spaghieri, trying to get him to reveal the whereabouts of his accomplices and the stolen loot. Little does the judge knows is that Spaghieri is intentionally stalling, buying himself the time needed for a breathtaking escape. On the 10th of May 1977, in the last meeting before his trial, Albert gave 3 papers of drawings of the Nice sewers. However, because the information appeared to be written in code, so the judge asks for his assistance. Before Spaghieri deciphers the code, he demands that the room be cleared of police. Taking advantage of a moment of distraction, all of a sudden he quickly leapt out of the second-story window of the courthouse and lands on a small ledge just under the window, then does a perfect tumble onto the roof of a car, as he was an accomplished paratrooper. Then he jumps onto the back of a waiting motorcycle. From that day, Spaghieri has never been found. Then, 6 months later, a letter arrives at his lawyer. He received 5,000 francs in the mail, and written on the envelope in Albert Spaghieri's handwriting, to reimburse the owner of the car whose roof I damaged during my fall. After his escape, the judge condemned him to life imprisonment. But Spaggiari never went back to prison, because he was never caught. The rest of his life he was on the run. He traveled a lot, mostly in South America, but did go back to France occasionally. Afraid of being recognized, he had plastic surgery in Argentina, and often wore disguises. Although he didn't want to be caught, he didn't want to be forgotten either. He regularly sent photos of himself to the newspapers, sometimes dressed as Santa Claus or wearing some other disguise. He also published a book. He went to Paris for the publication of his book. Then, in 1989, after 13 years on the run, Spaggiari surfaces one last time. Two men, dressed in paramilitary uniforms, deliver him to his mother's home in Nice. A few hours later, suffering from cancer, the mastermind of France's greatest vault heist dies. Understanding Albert Spaggiari's adventurous spirit is key to comprehending his remarkable heist. He took contemporary technology and applied it in ways no one else dared to consider. His belief was simple. He could breach the most secure vault in the world, and to this day, no one has done it again, and that's really what drove him.